When Jake Reaper Morrison, a feared biker with a reputation forged in blood and steel, hears a faint cry on the side of the road, he's sure it's another danger he should avoid. But when he sees Isabella, pregnant and alone, barely clinging to life, something inside him snaps. "Please, don't hurt me. I have nowhere to go," she whispers, her voice shaky. Despite his harsh past, Jake's cold heart warms. He can't just ride away this time. His act of compassion sets off a journey of redemption and healing, showing him that even the toughest souls can find a second chance. What would you do if you found yourself face to face with your darkest past, and the only way to protect someone you love was to confront it head-on? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more. Jake Reaper Morrison's Harley Davidson thundered across the barren stretch of Highway 49, its roaring engine filling the otherwise silent desert landscape. The wind whipped past his face, sending his graying beard fluttering and his leather jacket snapping in the gusts. It was the only sound that seemed to matter, drowning out the weight of his past, a past that clung to him, no matter how far he tried to ride. The Hill Wolves, the gang he had spent 15 brutal years with, were never far from his mind, even now. The violence, the betrayals, the bloodshed, all of it still lurked in the corners of his thoughts, like ghosts that refused to fade. The road was long and empty, a vast expanse of nothingness stretching in every direction. This was Jake's sanctuary now, the open road where the only company was his thoughts, and the only danger was the self-inflicted kind. The muffled hum of the engine beneath him was a temporary reprieve from the darkness he carried. Each mile he rode was a quiet attempt at redemption. But no matter how far he went, no matter how many empty roads he traveled, the ghosts followed. His life had been like that for the last 6 months, ever since he walked away from the Crimson Wolves. It hadn't been easy, though. The club didn't just let you go. They didn't like anyone walking away, especially not someone who had been a key enforcer for so long. But Jake had made the choice. He couldn't continue down the same path, couldn't keep pretending he was someone he wasn't. The blood-stained reputation, the illegal deals, the manipulation, none of it sat right with him anymore. He needed something different. Something better. The morning had begun like any other, a cup of black coffee and stale toast, the quiet hum of an old apartment above Murphy's auto shop. The walls were thin, the bed hard, but the work was honest, at least. It was far from the excitement of the club life, but it was quieter, peaceful in a way. He hadn't known peace in years. He shifted on his bike, reaching for the worn hospital bracelet tucked in his jacket pocket. Emma's bracelet. The one he found on the ground after leaving St. Mary's Hospital a few days ago. It haunted him, the image of that terrified little girl, her face battered and bruised, and those eyes that seemed to stare right through him. He had wanted to help her, but he'd been too late. Something about her haunted him, like a piece of his soul had been left behind, unfinished like the promises he'd broken in the past. But today, as his Harley ripped through the winding desert roads, he didn't have time to think about that. The road ahead was clear, stretching endlessly, and he was losing himself in the hum of the engine when he saw it. A flash of metal in his peripheral vision. His heart jolted as his eyes locked on the sight. A car wrecked, mangled against a telephone pole, steam rising from the crumpled hood. The driver's door hung open at an unnatural angle, and the surrounding area was eerily silent, save for the hiss of escaping coolant. Jake's military training kicked in instinctively. His body tensed, his mind scanning for potential threats. He didn't stop for just anyone. He didn't get involved. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Getting involved meant questions, authorities, attention, things Jake had no time for, things he didn't want. But something about the wreck didn't sit right. Something felt off. He pulled his bike to the side of the road, boots hitting the gravel with a sharp crunch as he dismounted. His eyes darted around the scene, searching for any sign of life, any movement. The air was still, and the wreckage was eerily quiet. Then, a faint sound broke through the silence. A voice, weak but unmistakable, calling out for help. "Please, don't hurt me. I can't move." Jake froze, his breath catching in his throat. The voice was small, desperate, and filled with fear. His heart skipped a beat as his gaze snapped to the ground beside the wreck. There on the side of the road was a woman, disheveled, battered, and lying on the gravel, her body twisted awkwardly in a way that made Jake's stomach twist. Her clothes were torn, her face pale, streaked with dirt and blood. Her eyes, wide and filled with terror, locked onto him as he stepped closer. For a brief moment, Jake's mind went blank. The weight of his past, of the violence he'd endured and caused, pressed down on him like a suffocating cloud. He had never been one to help. Not people like this. Not anyone. He had a reputation to uphold, and the last thing he needed was to be seen as a savior. But the woman's voice, the vulnerability in it, stirred something in him. Something he hadn't felt in years. Something long buried. His instinct screamed at him to turn around, to get back on his bike and leave her behind. But he didn't. His boots crunching against the gravel, Jake knelt beside her. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time in months, something inside him shifted. The cold, hardened biker who had once turned his back on everything soft and vulnerable was gone, replaced by a man who could feel again. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said, his voice gentler than he intended. The words felt strange coming from him, but they were real. His hand reached out instinctively, offering her the warmth of his jacket. He knew she needed help, but more than that, he realized she needed someone to care. For just a moment, the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them, stranded in the middle of nowhere, connected by something neither could fully understand. The woman's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but as her hand reached out and touched his, Jake's heart clenched. The fragile trust she placed in him was everything. It was a trust he hadn't earned, but in that moment, he realized he wanted to. "Can you tell me your name?" Jake asked, his voice calm as he carefully examined her injuries. His military training kicked in, his hand steady as he checked for broken bones, assessing her condition. "Isabella," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I'm pregnant. Please, I don't know where to go. Please just help me." The words hit Jake harder than anything else had in years. Pregnant. This woman, this stranger, was carrying a child, and she was alone, scared and in pain. The weight of her plea crashed over him. This wasn't just a woman in need. This was a life at stake. Jake made a decision. One he didn't expect to make. He wasn't just going to leave her there, alone in the desert, with no one to help. He was going to protect her. He didn't know why, but in that moment, he couldn't walk away. "I'm not leaving you," Jake said, his voice firm with a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. But in his gut, he knew it was the right choice. As he carefully helped her onto his bike, his thoughts drifted to his past, to the mistakes he'd made. The man he once was, selfish, violent, and cold, seemed like a distant memory. In this moment, with Isabella beside him, he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't running from his past. He was running toward something better. Jake's motorcycle rumbled steadily, its engine a comforting hum beneath him as the wind whipped past, carrying the dust of the desert into the open air. Isabella clung to him, her arms wrapped around his waist, her body trembling with every bump in the road. They had been riding for hours, the sun dipping lower in the sky as the miles passed in eerie silence. Jake tried not to think about the weight of her body against his, the faint scent of her hair mixing with the desert air. He didn't need distractions, he needed focus. But Isabella wasn't just a distraction, she was a reminder of everything he was running from, and everything he'd failed to protect. The road stretched endlessly, a blur of brown and orange, but with each passing mile, Isabella's presence next to him felt like a tightening knot in his chest. She was more than just a woman in need of help. She was a person, a soul he was now responsible for. And with every mile, every rough breath she took against his back, the reality of that responsibility sank deeper. They stopped at a small roadside diner, the neon sign flickering dimly in the twilight. Jake took a long drag from his cigarette as he surveyed the empty parking lot, the weight of his decision to stop settling over him. He hadn't planned to get involved, he never did. But the moment her desperate plea had left her lips, it had been too late. Now he was committed, and he couldn't turn back. Isabella gingerly stepped off the bike, her hand placed protectively over her stomach. She had barely spoken since he found her, only offering soft, strained words when necessary. But as Jake led her to the diner's entrance, he saw something flicker in her eyes: uncertainty, fear, and something else. Something Jake didn't recognize, but it unsettled him. Inside, they sat in a corner booth, away from the few scattered patrons who barely noticed them. Isabella's fingers fidgeted with the hem of her worn-out jacket, her eyes darting nervously to the door. She was constantly on edge, like a hunted animal waiting for a predator to pounce. Jake couldn't blame her. The road had been a constant reminder of how much she was running from, how little safety she had. She hadn't said much, but Jake could tell she was thinking about something more than just the ride. He saw the way her eyes clouded whenever her hand brushed over her belly, how she pulled away from him the moment his hand grazed hers. It was subtle, but it was there. Isabella, Jake's voice was softer than he intended. You don't have to keep this all to yourself. Whatever you're running from, you can tell me. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, the weight of his words sinking in as she looked at him. She opened her mouth as though to say something, but no sound came out. It was as if the words were trapped inside her, too painful to speak aloud. After a moment, she dropped her gaze to the table, her fingers tracing the condensation on her water glass. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. I'm running from him. Jake leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Who? My ex. His name is Mark, she said, her voice breaking. He's dangerous. I left him when I found out I was pregnant, but he doesn't just let things go. He'll come after me, he'll do whatever it takes to get me back. The words hung in the air like an oppressive weight. Jake could see the fear in her eyes now, the raw vulnerability she had tried to keep hidden behind a mask of quiet strength. Mark wasn't just a name. He was the nightmare she couldn't escape. Jake's hand clenched around his cup. He knew men like Mark. Men who thought they owned people, who believed that control was the ultimate power. Jake had seen it firsthand in the club, where loyalty was earned through bloodshed and betrayal was punished with violence. But this wasn't the club. This was real. This was a woman, a child, and a future that Mark had no right to take. Jake felt the stirrings of anger deep within him. Not just for what Mark had done to Isabella, but for what that kind of man represented. He hated people like him. People who believed they could dominate others through fear. Jake had walked away from a life of violence, but this was different. This was personal. And Isabella wasn't alone anymore. She had him now. He leaned in closer, his voice low and steady. You don't have to be scared anymore. I'll keep you safe. I promise. Isabella's eyes flickered with something that looked like disbelief. She shook her head slightly, as if trying to convince herself it wasn't true. You don't know what he's capable of. I don't care what he's capable of, Jake interrupted, his voice firm, unwavering. What I care about is making sure you're safe. And I'll do whatever it takes to make that happen. Her lips parted as if to protest, but she held the words back. Jake could see her struggle, could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe him, couldn't trust him. She had been betrayed too many times, left to fend for herself in a world that didn't care. Jake wasn't just some stranger she could lean on. Not yet. But the promise was out there now, hanging between them. It wasn't just words. Jake had crossed a line. He wasn't going to turn his back on her. Not now. Not ever. Isabella looked down at her hands, her expression softening, though there was still a lingering hesitation in her eyes. I don't know why you're doing this for me. You don't owe me anything. Jake reached across the table, gently placing his hand over hers. The warmth of his touch seemed to settle some of her nerves, though he knew it wasn't enough to erase the fear completely. Maybe I don't owe you anything. But I can't just walk away. Not after what I've seen. I've hurt enough people in my life. It's time I did something right. And keeping you safe. That's the right thing to do. She met his eyes for the first time, really looked at him. There was no more fear in her gaze, just uncertainty. But beneath that, Jake saw something else. Hope. A flicker of trust. She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. You'll stay with me? Jake nodded. For as long as you need. Isabella's shoulders sagged in relief, her breath shaky as if she had been holding it in for far too long. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, the first sign of acceptance he had seen from her since they had met. Jake's heart tightened as he realized the weight of the promise he had just made. He wasn't just offering her protection. He was offering her a chance to heal, a chance to move forward. And somewhere deep down, Jake realized that this was more than just about keeping her safe. It was about him, too. He hadn't known how lost he had been until he met her, how much he needed to fight for something good, something real. Jake sat back in his chair, the weight of the promise settling on him like a heavy coat. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and the danger wasn't over. But he wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever it took, he would keep her safe. He had to. Don't worry, Jake said softly, his gaze steady. "You're not alone anymore. I won't let anything happen to you." And for the first time since he walked away from the hill wolves, Jake felt something shift inside him, a glimmer of hope, a reminder that redemption was possible, even for someone like him. The days that followed had a strange rhythm to them, a quiet, unpredictable pace that seemed to stretch the hours longer than usual. Jake had gotten used to the sound of Isabella's soft breaths as she slept beside him at night, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly. They were in a small, secluded town now, far from the dangerous streets of his past, and Jake's motorcycle had become a familiar sound as it roared through the dusty roads every morning, the sun rising and setting on a life that felt fragile but real. Isabella had begun to trust him in ways Jake never thought possible. Her fear had started to fade, replaced by a kind of quiet optimism. Her pregnancy was still an uncertain journey, but it had become a shared bond between them, something to look forward to, a source of hope. They talked more now, about her childhood, her hopes for the baby, and the future they could build together. Jake even caught himself smiling at times, something he hadn't done in years. She had told him stories of her family, of her sister Sarah, who had always been her protector until she had to leave her home. Isabella's eyes would light up when she spoke of her, the love in her voice palpable. In turn, Jake told her about his time with the hill wolves, though he kept most of the details of the violence and the pain buried deep inside. He didn't want her to see him as the man he once was. He was trying to be someone better, someone she could count on. But no matter how far he rode, no matter how many days passed without incident, Jake knew he couldn't outrun the shadows of his past. He had made a promise to Isabella, to keep her safe and protect her from the violence she had fled. But promises, Jake knew, were fragile things, especially when they were made to people whose lives were tangled with his own. One late afternoon, as Jake returned from a supply run to the nearby town, he noticed something strange in the corner of the porch. A letter, its edges curled from the wind, sat on the small wooden table by the front door. It was plain, unmarked, but Jake's instincts immediately went on high alert. He hadn't expected anyone. No one should have known where they were. He picked it up with a sense of dread. His heart beat harder against his chest, the old feeling of impending danger rising up in him like a flood. His fingers were tense as he opened the envelope, the crinkling sound of paper far too loud in the stillness of the evening. Inside, the letter was simple, written in blocky, precise handwriting that immediately sent a chill down his spine. "You can't run forever, Reaper. The wolves want you back. Come back to the pack, and you can have your life. Stay gone, and we'll take what's ours. This is your last warning." The words were like a slap to the face, cold and unforgiving. His stomach twisted in knots as he read the letter again, his mind racing. He had known this day would come, but he had hoped it would be much later. He had hoped the past would stay buried in the rearview mirror. But the hill wolves never let go. They never let their brothers escape. Jake balled the letter up in his fist, his jaw clenched as anger flared inside him. The weight of the old life pressed in on him, reminding him of the promises he had broken, the people he had hurt, and the things he had done for the club. He had tried to escape, to build something real with Isabella, but now, the shadow of the wolves loomed over them like a storm on the horizon. He could feel the familiar tug of loyalty deep within his chest, the pull of the family he had left behind, the brothers he had bled with. But that was the past. The present was Isabella. The future was the baby she carried, and the life they could have. That was what he had chosen. But the letter, the threat, reminded him that no matter how far he ran, the hill wolves would never let him go. They would come for him. And they would come for Isabella if he didn't comply. He stood still on the porch, the letter crumpled in his hand, staring into the horizon where the sun was slowly setting. The weight of his past and the decision before him pressed down on him like a boulder. He could feel the decision shaping inside him, but it wasn't one he was ready to make. Not yet. Inside the house, Isabella moved quietly, her hand resting on her stomach as she watched him. She knew something was wrong, knew the change in his posture, the sudden tension in his movements. She had come to rely on Jake more than she'd ever imagined, and now, she could see the fear in his eyes that he'd tried so hard to hide from her. "Jake." Isabella's voice was soft, cautious. She stepped forward, her gaze worried. "What's wrong?" Jake looked at her, the crumpled letter still in his hand. He couldn't hide it from her any longer. He had promised to protect her, to keep her safe, but that promise had just become a heavy weight he wasn't sure he could carry. "The wolves," Jake said quietly, his voice strained. "They found me. They want me back. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and final. Isabella's eyes widened, and she took a hesitant step forward. No. No, Jake. You're not going back to them. You can't. Jake's jaw tightened as he clenched his fists, the letter now crushed beyond recognition. I don't have a choice, Isabella. If I don't go back, they'll come for you. They'll come for the baby. I can't let that happen. Her face paled as the realization sank in. She took a step back, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as if to protect the life growing inside her. But you promised. You promised you'd keep me safe. The words hit Jake harder than he expected. The weight of the promise he had made to her, the promise to protect her, to fight for her, now seemed like an impossible thing to uphold. The Hill Wolves had always been ruthless. They didn't take no for an answer. And now, the consequences of walking away from them were closing in on him, faster than he could escape. I will keep you safe, Jake said, his voice thick with determination. But I have to make a choice. Either I go back, or they destroy everything I've built here. Everything I've built with you. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything at first. She was still processing, still trying to understand. Jake could see the fear in her eyes, and it killed him. He had promised her safety, but the reality of his past was more dangerous than he ever imagined. I'll protect you, Jake whispered, his voice breaking. No matter the cost. I swear it. The promise was as much to himself as it was to Isabella. But deep down, Jake knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. The wolves were coming for him. They wouldn't stop until they had him back. And if he didn't face them, he knew they would take the life he was trying to build, one that he never thought he deserved but had come to cherish. Isabella's hand rested gently on his, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Whatever happens, Jake, I'm with you. Jake nodded, his chest tight as the weight of the decision crashed down on him. The wolves had returned to claim him. And now, he had to make the hardest choice of his life: go back to the family that raised him, or protect the family he had fought so hard to create. But as he stood there with Isabella's hand in his, Jake realized one thing. No matter the cost, he wasn't going to let them destroy the life he was trying to build. He would face his past, and he would do it for her. The air in the small house felt thicker that evening, heavy with unspoken words and looming dread. Isabella sat by the window, watching the sun dip low behind the hills. The warm golden glow of dusk cast long shadows across the floor, but the light didn't touch the worry etched on her face. Jake had been distant the last few days, a silent storm brewing inside him that she could feel but not understand. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, the baby growing steadily, her future still uncertain. She had trusted Jake with her life, with her safety. She had believed in his promise to protect her. But now, the air was charged with tension, and she knew something was coming. The knock on the door shattered the stillness, sharp and sudden, sending a ripple of panic through her. Isabella's breath caught in her throat, and she turned to Jake, who was standing in the doorway of the small living room, his back rigid, his eyes cold as ice. She knew. The way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched, it was the same look he had when he was about to face a threat from his past. And that's when it hit her. The Hill Wolves. They had found him. Isabella stood, her legs suddenly weak beneath her. Jake, she whispered, her voice trembling. What's going on? Jake didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the door, his body still as a statue. The truth about his past, the violent world he had walked away from, was no longer something he could keep hidden. The Hill Wolves were closing in, and he had known this moment would come. I've been trying to protect you, Jake said, his voice strained, as if every word was being forced out. But they've found us. They'll come for you if I don't do something. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest. What do you mean? Who are they? What do you mean they'll come for me? Jake walked toward her, his footsteps heavy, his eyes never leaving the door. The Hill Wolves. They don't forgive anyone who leaves. I knew the risks when I walked away, but I didn't expect them to come after you. They won't stop until I go back, Isabella. And if I don't, they'll make sure you're their next target. Isabella took a step back, her mind reeling. The Hill Wolves were no ordinary gang. They were ruthless, violent, and Jake knew them better than anyone. He had been one of them, and they had been a twisted form of family for him. But she was his family now. She and the baby. A dark, twisted weight settled in the pit of her stomach. Jake had promised to protect her, to keep her safe. But the hill wolves were not easily deterred. They would stop at nothing. And now, Jake was caught between the man he used to be and the man he had become. She looked at him, her eyes filled with fear. "Jake, what are you going to do? You promised me you wouldn't let them hurt me." Jake's expression hardened, and for a moment, the biker he used to be, cold, unyielding, slipped to the surface. He took a deep breath, his voice quieter now. "I'll protect you. No matter the cost. But I have to face them. I can't let them hurt you, Isabella. Not after everything we've been through." The knock on the door came again, louder this time, demanding attention. A shiver ran down Isabella's spine as she realized that the confrontation she had feared was inevitable. She turned to Jake, her heart in her throat. "Please don't go back to them. You're different now. You don't have to do this." Jake's eyes softened as he looked at her, but there was something resolute in them that she knew she couldn't change. "You don't understand, Isabella. The wolves don't just let people walk away. I'm marked. If I don't face them, they'll come after you. They'll destroy everything we've built." Isabella felt the sharp sting of helplessness. She didn't know what he had been through in that life, but she knew the man he was now. The man who had saved her, protected her, and made her feel safe. She couldn't bear the thought of him going back to the darkness he had escaped. "I can't lose you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You can't go back. Please." Jake's face tightened, his hand reaching for the door. "I have no choice." Before he could open it, there was another knock, this one harder, more insistent. Then, through the wood, came a voice that made Isabella's blood run cold. "Reaper, we know you're in there. Open up." Jake turned to Isabella one last time. The man she had come to know, the man who had promised to protect her, was now a stranger facing down a past that had come calling. He stepped toward her, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder, his touch gentle, yet filled with an unspoken sorrow. "I'll keep my promise, Isabella. I'll never let them harm you. But this is something I have to do." The door creaked open, the shadows of the past falling over him like a heavy cloak. Outside stood two men, both wearing leather jackets adorned with the unmistakable patch of the hill wolves. Their faces were hardened, cold, and as Jake stepped forward, they didn't flinch. They didn't move. They just stood there, waiting for him to return. "Reaper," the man on the left said, his voice low, menacing. "It's time to come home." Jake's jaw clenched. The tension in the air was suffocating, and Isabella could see the conflict in his eyes. The loyalty he had once felt for these men, the men who had shaped him, was still there, buried deep beneath the surface. But he had a new life now. A life with Isabella. A life he would protect at all costs. "I'm not going back," Jake said, his voice steady, yet heavy with the weight of his words. "I've walked away. I'm done with that life." The men exchanged glances, and Isabella could see the shift in their expressions. It was the kind of look that only came when someone had betrayed the pack. It was the kind of look that made it clear there would be consequences. "Then you've made your choice," the second man said, his voice colder than before. "But you know the price of betrayal. We'll make sure you pay for this, Reaper. We always do." Jake didn't flinch. He stepped closer to the door, his body tense, ready for what was coming. He knew this confrontation wasn't over. It was just beginning. "Stay away from her," Jake growled, his voice low and dangerous. "If you want to touch anyone, you'll have to go through me." The two men stepped back slightly, but their eyes never left him. Isabella stood frozen behind him, her heart racing in her chest. This was the moment she had feared. This was the storm Jake had warned her about. And as Jake prepared for the battle that was about to unfold, he made a promise to himself. No matter the cost, no matter the consequences, he would protect Isabella. Even if it meant confronting the wolves one last time. The storm was here, and Jake wasn't running anymore. What would you do if you were in Jake's position? Would you risk everything to face your dangerous past and protect the one you love? Let us know in the comments below. The air was thick with tension, and the setting sun painted the world in blood-red hues, as if the sky itself could sense the storm brewing. Inside the house, Isabella's breath came in shallow, frantic bursts. She could feel it, the inevitable clash, the one Jake had been dreading, the one that was now upon them. She huddled in the corner, her hand protectively over her stomach, her eyes glued to the door, praying that Jake would come out of this unscathed. Jake's footsteps echoed through the small living room as he paced back and forth. His eyes were hard, his jaw set in grim determination. The weight of what was coming, the hill wolves, had settled over him like a cloak of inevitability. They weren't just coming to bring him back, they were coming to make him pay for walking away. The gang had always demanded loyalty, but that loyalty had been shattered the moment Jake realized that family wasn't something you earned through violence. It was something you built with love and trust. And now his old brothers were here, ready to claim him again, ready to drag him back into the life he'd worked so hard to escape. But there was no turning back now. He'd made his choice, and this time, he was ready to fight for the future he'd chosen. Outside, the growl of engines echoed across the empty road, followed by the screech of tires against gravel. The hill wolves had arrived. Jake took a deep breath, his heart pounding as he looked one last time at Isabella, who was watching him from the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. He wanted to go to her, tell her everything would be okay, but he couldn't afford the luxury of that kind of promise. He had made a vow to protect her, and now he had to live up to it. This wasn't just about physical survival. It was about choosing who he was. The man he had been, or the man he had become. "Stay inside," Jake said, his voice tight but calm. "No matter what happens, don't come out. I'll handle this." Isabella nodded, her face pale but resolute. She didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The truth was hanging in the air between them. Jake was going to confront his past, and there was no telling what would come of it. She had never seen him like this before, steely-eyed, ready for whatever came next. But there was no denying it, Jake was no longer the man he used to be. He wasn't the cold, ruthless enforcer of the hill wolves anymore. He was someone else. Someone who would fight for her, for the life they had started to build together. As the roar of the engines grew louder, Jake moved toward the door, his hand grazing the cold metal handle. The door swung open with a groan, and there they were. The hill wolves. 6 men in black leather jackets adorned with the gang's patch. But the one Jake's eyes immediately locked onto was Viper, the club's leader, the man who had been like a brother to him. Viper's cold, calculating eyes met Jake's, and for a brief moment, the two men stood in a silent standoff. There was history between them, shared battles, shared blood, a bond forged in the fires of violence. But that was in the past. The bond had been broken the day Jake walked away. And now, Viper wasn't just a leader, he was a threat. "You've got some nerve, Reaper," Viper said, his voice low and laced with venom. "Thought you could just walk away from us? From everything we built together? You're coming back whether you like it or not." Jake didn't flinch. His eyes never left Viper's as he stepped forward, his voice steady, unwavering. "I'm not coming back. You know what I've done. I've walked away. And I've moved on." Viper's lips curled into a tight smile, one that never reached his eyes. "You think you can just leave that easy? You think we're just gonna forget about you? About everything you did for us?" "I don't owe you anything anymore, Viper," Jake said, his voice hardening. "Not a damn thing." A tense silence filled the air as the two men stood face to face. Isabella's heart raced from the other room. She could hear the faint echoes of their conversation, but it was the silence that terrified her. This wasn't just a fight for Jake's past, it was a fight for his soul. Would he give in to the violence, the loyalty that had once defined him, or would he choose the family he had with Isabella? Viper took a step forward, his voice a dangerous growl. "You were always weak, Reaper. You always thought you could do things your way, like you were better than the rest of us. But you're nothing without the wolves. And you know it." Jake's pulse quickened, but his resolve didn't waver. He had fought too hard to let this life drag him back. "You're wrong," Jake said, his voice a low growl of his own. "I'm not nothing. I've got something worth fighting for now. A real family. And I'll kill anyone who threatens that." Without another word, Viper lunged. The first punch came fast and hard, but Jake was ready. He blocked it with ease, pivoting on his heels as he slammed his fist into Viper's jaw. The hit was clean, a blow that sent the club leader stumbling back, shock evident in his eyes. But Viper quickly recovered, swinging wildly, his fists fueled by rage and betrayal. The fight was brutal. It wasn't just fists and kicks, it was the culmination of years of hatred, the raw primal need to prove dominance. Each blow felt like a part of Jake's soul being torn away, But with each punch he landed, each strike against his old brothers, the man he used to be faded just a little more. Isabella stood in the doorway, her heart racing, unable to tear her eyes away from the brutal fight unfolding before her. She wanted to stop it, to pull Jake away, but she knew he had to do this. He had to face his past, and he had to do it for both of them. Jake landed another blow, his fist cracking against Viper's nose, sending blood splattering across the ground. But the battle wasn't just physical. It was a fight for Jake's future, the man he was now, the man who would protect Isabella at all costs, and the man he once was, tangled in a life of violence and regret. The fight continued, raw and relentless, but with each strike, Jake was taking another step away from the man he had been. This fight was more than just about survival, it was about choosing what he stood for. And with every punch, every moment that pushed him further from his past, Jake knew one thing for sure: he was never going back. The sound of Viper's groaning body hitting the ground was the end of it. Jake stood over him, panting, bloodied, but resolute. The wolves had been defeated, and so had the man he used to be. If you were in Jake's shoes, would you choose loyalty to your past or the chance to build a new future? Let us know below. The night was still, a haunting silence hanging heavy in the air as Jake stood over the broken bodies of the hill wolves. His chest heaved with each breath, blood from a gash on his brow dripping down his face, mixing with the dirt and sweat that covered his skin. The fight had been long, brutal, and unforgiving, but in the end, Jake stood victorious. The wolves had been pushed back, at least for now. But victory had a cost. Jake's body ached, the sharp sting of each bruise, cut, and bruised bone reminding him of the price he had paid. The physical wounds would heal, eventually. But the deeper unseen wounds, the ones that ran far beneath the surface, would take much longer to mend. Isabella's voice broke through the haze of his thoughts. "Jake," she whispered from the doorway, her voice trembling, her figure silhouetted in the dim light from inside. "Is it over?" Jake's gaze locked onto her, his heart clenched tight in his chest. She stood there, safe, her hand protectively over her belly, her eyes wide with concern. The fear in them wasn't just for her own safety, it was for him too. The man she had come to trust, the man she had given her heart to, was now scarred by his past in a way that couldn't be undone. "It's over," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from the fight. But the finality of those words didn't make the weight on his shoulders any lighter. He turned away from her, stepping over the broken bodies of the men who had once been his brothers. The hill wolves were no longer his problem, but they had left a trail of destruction in their wake. The family he had built with Isabella, the fragile hope he had for a future with her, was now sitting on a razor's edge. The wolves might be gone, but their shadow would linger over him for a long time. Isabella approached him cautiously, her footsteps soft but purposeful. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his torn jacket, and for a brief moment, her touch grounded him. "I thought I lost you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes searched his, as if looking for something, anything, to reassure her. "I thought I lost everything." Jake let out a long breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He looked down at her, his eyes softening despite the turmoil swirling inside him. He had done what needed to be done to keep her safe, but he couldn't escape the truth of it all. This life was never going to be easy. He could fight the wolves, take down the men who had once been his brothers, but the hardest battle, perhaps the most important one, was rebuilding the life he had thrown away. "I'm here," he said finally, his voice steady but laced with weariness. "And I'm not going anywhere." But even as he spoke the words, Jake knew that walking away from the hill wolves meant more than just leaving a violent past behind. It meant cutting ties with a part of himself that had once defined him: loyalty, brotherhood, the rush of power that came from being part of a gang that ruled everything. He had chosen Isabella, but the cost of that choice was steep. Jake turned to face the horizon. The night sky stretched out before him, an endless expanse that seemed both suffocating and liberating all at once. He had chosen this life with Isabella. He had promised to protect her, to give her and their child a future, but as the dust settled and the adrenaline faded, the true weight of what he had given up began to sink in. It was more than just his brothers. It was his identity. The hill wolves had been his family for so long. They had raised him, shaped him into the man he was, violent, cold, and unforgiving. That had been who he was, who he'd thought he had to be. But as he looked at Isabella, her face filled with both gratitude and sadness, Jake realized that the man he had become was something entirely different. And he had to learn to live with that. Isabella stepped closer, gently placing her hand on his arm, grounding him in the moment. "Jake, you don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "We're in this together. Whatever comes next." Jake's eyes flickered to hers, his heart clenching. He had fought so hard to protect her, to give her a life free from fear, but now, the truth of what it meant to start over was crashing down on him. He didn't know how to rebuild. Didn't know how to make up for all the lost years, all the damage he'd caused. He looked down at her hand on his arm, the soft warmth of her touch offering the kind of solace he had never known. "I don't deserve you, Isabella," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've done things. Terrible things." She shook her head, her expression fierce, her eyes full of love and conviction. "You're not the man you used to be, Jake. You're here now. You're with me. That's all that matters." Jake closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. He couldn't change the past, no matter how much he wished he could. But he could shape the future. And it was a future he wanted with her and their child. "Do you think we can make it?" Jake asked quietly, the question hanging in the air between them. He wasn't just asking about their survival, he was asking about redemption. About whether a man like him could ever truly change, could ever truly earn the kind of peace he saw in Isabella's eyes. She didn't hesitate. "I know we can." For a moment, Jake just stood there, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. The fight had been brutal. The hill wolves had been pushed back, but the scars, physical and emotional, remained. His past was not something he could escape, not completely. But maybe it didn't have to define him. Not anymore. "I'll keep my promise," Jake said finally, his voice firm. "I'll never let anyone harm you. Not again. And I'll do whatever it takes to build a life for us, one that's worth living." Isabella smiled softly, her fingers curling around his hand, the warmth of her touch a reminder of everything worth fighting for. "We'll do it together." Jake nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. The cost of redemption had been steep, but it had been worth it. He wasn't the same man who had ridden into that fight. He had changed. And for the first time he could see a future, one that wasn't defined by violence, by the wolves, or by the man he used to be. It was a future where love, loyalty, and family could finally take root. And that was enough. For now. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden light over the horizon, painting the road ahead with the promise of a new day. Jake's Harley revved softly beneath him, its powerful engine humming like the heartbeat of a man who had fought, and survived, against his own darkness. He glanced to the side, where Isabella sat behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, her grip strong and steady, the weight of her trust a comforting presence against the storm of his past. It was early, too early for the world to be awake, but it felt right. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, quite the opposite, it was peaceful, like the calm that follows the storm. The kind of peace Jake had never thought possible. In the rearview mirror, the small town they had left behind was already fading, a distant memory. Behind them, the ghosts of the hill wolves, their violence, and their hold on him, were vanishing with every mile. Jake wasn't just leaving a place behind. He was leaving a part of himself, the man he had once been, the man he had let define him for so long. His hand tightened on the throttle as they cruised through the empty highway, the wind rushing past, the sun now fully breaking over the landscape. Isabella's breath was warm against his back, and though he couldn't see her face, he knew she was looking at the same horizon, just as hopeful, just as uncertain. "Where do we go now?" Isabella's voice broke the stillness, soft but filled with curiosity. It wasn't a question of location, not really. It was a question about their future. Where did they go from here? What did the road ahead hold for them? Jake exhaled slowly, letting the question hang in the air for a moment, his mind spinning with possibilities. He could hear the faint hum of the engine beneath them, the sound of freedom, a sound that felt different now. It wasn't just the sound of a man running away from his past. It was the sound of a man building a future. "I don't know," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "But wherever it is, we'll face it together." Isabella's arms tightened around him, the warmth of her touch a promise, a connection that filled him with something new, something he hadn't known he was capable of, hope. It wasn't just the hope of survival, of getting through the fight with the wolves. It was a deeper kind of hope, the kind that came from knowing he wasn't alone anymore. That for the first time in his life, he didn't have to face the world on his own. They had both survived the darkness of their pasts. Isabella had fled a violent relationship, carrying the weight of that trauma with her. Jake had fought his way out of a gang, a world built on loyalty through violence, but one that had nearly destroyed him. Now they were both here on this road together, and it felt like the beginning of something that wasn't just about survival. It was about living. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the open road, dust, freedom, the promise of a new life. Isabella's face, flushed from the wind, rested against his back, and Jake felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce desire to shield her from anything that could threaten this new life they were carving together. "I've never been anywhere like this," she said, her voice a mix of awe and wonder. "I've always lived in the shadow of what I was running from. Never thought I'd get the chance to live without looking over my shoulder." Jake's heart tightened at her words. He had heard the fear in her voice the first time they'd met, the desperation in her eyes when she had pleaded for his help. And now he could hear the relief in her tone, the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, she could finally find the peace she deserved. "We'll find it," Jake said, his voice steady. "The peace. The life we've been looking for." He wasn't just promising her a place to settle down, a safe house. He was promising her a future. He was promising her the chance to leave behind the ghosts of her past, the ones that had kept her bound in fear. And in doing so, he was promising himself something too. He was promising himself the chance to be someone different. The road ahead was uncertain. Jake knew that. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. The past had a way of showing up, and it had a way of sticking around longer than you wanted. But as he felt Isabella's heartbeat against his back, as he heard the steady rhythm of the bike's engine, he realized that he wasn't afraid anymore. The man he had been, the one consumed by the hill wolves and the violence of his past, was gone. In his place stood a man who was committed to rebuilding, to finding redemption, not just for Isabella but for himself. He had made mistakes. He had hurt people. He had been the cause of much pain. But in that moment, as the open road stretched out before him, he realized that redemption wasn't a single event. It wasn't something that happened all at once. It was something you built, piece by piece. It was something you earned, not by fighting the past, but by choosing the future. Isabella's hand slipped into his, her fingers lacing with his as they continued to ride. Her touch was a silent promise, one that echoed Jake's unspoken vow to her. The future was still unknown, and the road ahead was long, but for the first time, Jake felt like it was a road worth traveling. A road worth fighting for. And as the sun finally rose high, casting its light on the path ahead, Jake knew one thing for sure: no matter what came next, he was no longer the man he had been. He was something better. And he was determined to make sure Isabella, and the life they had together, would never be threatened again. They were building something new, a life from the ashes of their pasts, and no matter what obstacles the road threw at them, Jake knew one thing for certain: love, redemption, and hope would guide them forward. Together. Always. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.